Welcome, man. Basketball by association. It is your BbA Byte, your midweek chomp down on the association. Arky here, Joel there. Joel, what's up, player?
Hope you got your molars ready, everybody. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and you want the video version, check us out on YouTube and give us a like, a subscribe, a share there, especially if you're there already. We really thank you. We're getting the channel off the ground. New stuff, fun stuff. And if you're on YouTube, we know that sometimes you want to hear some basketball podcastery and you can't get the video version because of where you are. If you want the audio version, Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, anywhere you get your podcasts, you will find Basketball by Association as we talk about hoops, which we are going to do right now.
Yeah, speaking of, ESPN has this this cover story right on the front page, and you know when I see the giant New York Knicks logo like on the front page of ESPN.com, I'm a little giddy inside. I'm a little like, oh, what has happened here? Usually they don't make the front page for like the Charles Oakley instance. So usually that's just sort of a story on the side. This one's kind of interesting. It's an oral history of it's called Inside the Knicks' Secret Attempt to Lure Michael Jordan from the Bulls. And it's an oral history of the 96 offseason in which Michael Jordan was going to retire. But the Knicks apparently were trying to make this play to get Michael Jordan because Patrick Ewing was getting older, and like that team was getting old, right? And they wanted to make a push for a championship, and they wanted another superstar to go next to Patrick Ewing.
Yeah,
and so they sort of talked about the history of trying to see what they could do to make a deal with Michael Jordan happen. Have you seen this?
I was queued up to it by you. It had just shown up, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And this is one of those rare instances. I'm actually excited about this one. It's one of those rare instances where I literally have never heard this story before. I've never heard that this was a thing. You've heard about other teams that were kind of kicking the tires around Jordan and that sort of thing. Other players that maybe wanted to play with him, but I hadn't heard this Knicks angle. It'll be interesting to me to see how much legs it did or didn't have, because it may be one of those non-stories. Like every team in the league probably had some sort of conversation about, hey, how could we do this? Could we do this? And it's left on the cutting room floor. You'd be stupid not to. And this is the sort of thing that GMs literally get paid to do, is to go through scenario after scenario, kick the tires on every single player that they can and see what fits. So I'll be interested if it's just that, or it sounds like there were some conversations that were actually had and that sort of thing. And we'll see how far it really got. But I'm looking forward to that one.
There were so the Knicks GM at the time is interviewed in this, and so is Michael Jordan's agent at the time. And I think what's interesting about this is because there were real conversations that were had about this, especially between, and seems almost primarily between, the agent and GM, because Michael Jordan's not in this piece, right, because Michael Jordan doesn't do anything. So
unless he gets paid.
But I think it's interesting because we're talking about also a time, if people sort of remember, in 96, like we were going into like brand new unrestricted free agency rules and stuff. Like there's a time when like the money in the NBA, we're not even talking just now, but like the money then, like Patrick Ewing, so they talked about Patrick Ewing's contract being 10 years, $32 million, right? Which is not a greatest, especially since there was
nothing today, but the length of it was eye-popping even at that time,
Right. Magic Johnson's contract was 25 years, $25 million.
Right.
Things definitely have changed. In fact, did you know Patrick Ewing's contract for 10 years, $32 million included a balloon payment of $18.75 million, like up front, and then everything else sort of was, gravy down. But
that would make sense. And you're right, like coming after that, you've got the Juwan Howard, the Kevin Garnett, the Alonzo Mourning deals where you start to get into the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Juwan Howard going for like $105 million. In fact, his deal, I think, ended up being vetoed, and it's talked about this by the players' union. It was talked about in this piece, to where he ended up going back to Washington to play because there was some slight language that was not. Okay, I shouldn't say slight language. It was deemed out that the Heat could not pay the $105 million to pay for him. Anyway, it's all in the piece, and I think it's interesting. But one thing I did find super compelling, you'll get here, is that the Larry Bird's rules had been in to where basically if you drafted the guy before the salary cap, you could pay whatever you wanted. Right?
Yeah, you have an inside track, and there was really no salary cap yet in the way that we think of it. This is why those numbers all of a sudden started to balloon, and some owners, especially small markets like Indiana, freak out because they know they're not going to be able to pay that.
Right. So Chicago was the only one that could pay Michael Jordan essentially whatever they felt comfortable paying him. So there was this idea from Michael Jordan's agent going into that offseason. Michael Jordan said to the Bulls and Reinsdorf and to the Knicks GM at the time, he said, "You're going to make one offer, your best offer, and we'll just tell you yes or no." And Reinsdorf hated that because he's like, "You mean I could lose my guy and not even be able to make a second?" Anyway, so the Bulls could have paid a multitude of money what the Knicks could pay. The Knicks said they were willing, and they had made a bunch of money free in the offseason to their salary cap. They said, "We will give you essentially all of the salary cap room we have." And going back on it, that was only $9.5 million that they had sort of free. But like the Knicks were willing to apparently like do some underhanded shady deals, like to try to get some money from sponsorships and stuff.
And they probably would have gotten away with it too, those darn Knicks, whereas somebody like the Minnesota Timberwolves makes a side deal with Joe Smith to re-sign, and of course they get dinged and lose 5 years of draft picks for it.
Well, listen, we're talking real Marcus versus
we're talking Scooby-Doo level stuff where David Stern will just turn a blind eye and never acknowledge that it happened.
Yeah, so I think it's a fascinating piece. If people want to check it out on ESPN.com, I suggest you should. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with a really funny story to start this thing, which is Kevin Love apologizing for his outburst in Toronto, which was the best. If you missed it,
it was weird. Things got weird.
I don't know how you really could have. The best moment of maybe the NBA all season was after a made bucket. The official tends to give Kevin Love the ball to inbound it. He just slaps it into bounds. Toronto realizes what happens, picks it up, shoots a three, makes it. And that's just sort of the beginning of what happens with Kevin Love. But let me just ask you, Joel, if Kevin Love was on like a contender, a real team, like we'd be blowing this story up. Like this is one of the most egregious I can think of.
This is Ricky Davis level shooting in your own basket to get your points, like back in the day. And that's another Cavalier, by the way, on a really crappy Cavaliers team doing that. It's that level. I
kind of feel like when you do something like this, I think it changes how people, especially your teammates, think about you, because that is a direct reflection upon how you respect not only the game, but your teammates. And all you have is your teammates to go to bat for you. And if you do something like that, like I think, it's not going to submarine the Cavs. They suck. But that doesn't matter. But I think that can change how your teammates look at you. And I don't know. Am I off base thinking that that's actually kind of a big deal internally?
No, it is a big deal internally because it hurts his trade value too. And his trade value clearly was already very low because he's a guy making a max level contract who's been injured ever since he signed it, has barely appeared at all. When he has appeared, he looks like a replacement level bench rotation player. So the production does not match the means. If the Cavaliers could have traded him, they would have done it 10 times over during the last 2 years. And the fact that they haven't been able to means there is no market for him. Now, if you slap the label of malcontent on top of that, it becomes a nuclear level contract where nobody wants to touch it. And you're looking at a buyout 2 years into the deal, or you're looking to have to give up something just to get rid of him rather than to use him as cap ballast. And that becomes really difficult. Do you send the guy home and just pay him to not be there, as the Cavaliers did with J.R. Smith a few years ago, and has happened many times in NBA history, and then you eventually work out a buyout? Or, do you try to punish him in some way and don't play him? But that's already been what he's been doing himself with the injury, so that probably doesn't do anything. I will say this. There's a couple levels of context with the Love thing. As I watched that video, and he's clearly frustrated with the referees.
Yeah, there have been like 3 or 4 straight non-calls in that game that he was
referee that he is specifically pissed at is the one who throws him the ball. And right before that, walking over to the stanchion to get in place for that inbounds, Love kind of punches or slaps the stanchion on the basket. So he's clearly pissed. Like, he's in his feels. He's angry about that. And then you turn around and the next thing you see is said referee that you are extra pissed at throwing the ball at you. I saw Love taking a swipe at the ball as if to like pound it down in frustration, or even to pound it back at the referee. I don't really think, when I watch that video, I don't see him actually thinking, hey, I'm getting the ball back into play, we're ready to go. And he kind of alluded to that. He said it wasn't even supposed to go in bounds. I see him taking one more angry swipe down at the ball, like, what the hell is this? And then the ball just happens to go in play, and the Raptors are like, oh, I guess it's in play. And the referee's like, yep, it's in play. You touched it. And so it spirals out of control. And he has said, and granted, I think most of us are not going to accept his apology, but he has said, like, that it was unintentional. It was not meant to go back to them. And I wasn't thinking clearly about that. Granted, you're being paid $100 million to think about that stuff and not do that stuff. But there is that level of context that I believe what he says, insofar as I don't think he was assuming, hey, I'm inbounding the ball. I think he's trying to hit the ball back at the ref to get a tee, or to slap the ball down one more time. I don't know if that changes your assessment of anything about it. But I don't think it's as egregious as like Ricky Davis going, oh, I need one more rebound and basket, I'm going to shoot on my own basket. I don't think it's quite that intentional,
Well, I mean, I think you used the 15 minutes basically that he spoke to the media on the Zoom call to basically apologize for all of that. And I get it, but like, he didn't even react afterwards. Like, when the ball was clearly in play, and it wasn't like a half a second the ball was laid up.
That's the bad part.
He didn't like take a step in bounds. It was like, well, I guess I'm going to get the ball back again and try this all over again. But like, I get it. And I don't want to be like super professional guy. You getting all this money I get it. Temper flare. We're all sort of to that same bond, human. Like, if things constantly go against us, we're going to be frustrated at the thing that we perceive is
sliding. You might lash out. You might lash out on that. Yep.
Yeah. But like, even if you screw up, acknowledge that you're screwing up at the time. You're like, oh crap, I need to try to, like, if nothing else, take a step forward, like, to sort of,
And granted, go ahead.
I was going to say, that could be the moment where everyone's just stunned, like, what is happening right now? This is not at all what I was expecting. But I feel like we all have that piece in our brain to where, like, we wanted to make a statement, right? And it goes wrong, but we realize it quickly. And to me, it didn't seem like, let me put it this way. He did what he did, even if it was just to slap the ball down and he wanted to bounce it one more time or bounce it back at the official or something to get a technical. But he had every intention of making a statement right then. And I don't think he cared what happened in the seconds afterwards.
And then if you watch the rest of the sequence, after the Raptors immediately score from the steal, he walks down the court. They inbound the ball, thankfully, to somebody else. He sets a high screen, walking into the high screen, never makes contact on the high screen, gets the ball as a pass to spot up. He gives a half-hearted pass around the wing, which also gets stolen. Now, at that point, maybe the light bulb finally went on, because after the half-hearted pass, he does race down court and tries to play defense. He commits a foul. He wraps the other guy up, makes sure the other guy is okay, and then seems to be back in it. Like he's lucid after that point, although he gets benched shortly after that. And maybe that psychs him out. Now, again, this is not the first time. Remember that Kevin Love has shown up teammates or shown up the game. It happened last year where he got really, really frustrated at Colin Sexton and was kind of like yelling at him on the court and just like shut down. And so the fact that this is a trend, and I've got to say this as a Timberwolves fan, when Kevin Love was in Minnesota, and this is peak Kevin Love, like this is perennial all-star, walking double-double, one of the most devastating forwards in the game because of his passing, his stretchability, and just that sheer rebounding. He's a star at that point. He got a bad rep in Minnesota that was partially deserved because he would talk a good game in those media moments. And he was active in the community. He had his charity. He did some good things. But then in between the lines and a lot of other commentary that he would give to reporters when it was just him and them, or comments he would make, you could read between the lines. There was always this passive aggressive undertone as if he really didn't want to be there in Minnesota, which is understandable. It's a tough place to be. And that he was better than the situation. He didn't deserve to be there. And you're wondering if that's kind of the same thing coming up with the Cavaliers. Like, is this one of those guys, and they're out there, that just cannot function on a bad team? They're not a strong enough leader, or maybe just not that type of a person where they can objectively do that and handle that. They need to be in a winning situation. And oftentimes that means you're going to be a lesser guy in that winning situation to make it work. But there are plenty of players like that. J.R. Smith is a fantastic example. You do not want J.R. Smith at any point in his career on a team that's going nowhere. Put him around some good leadership and give him a role, and he can be productive, right? So I don't know. There is a track record here, and that does nothing more than tighten the potential market for Kevin Love in the first place. And most of those contenders don't have a max level contract to hand out to a guy who his career is swirling the drain slowly right now because of production and injury. It is. And maybe that's part of the frustration that's kind of subliminally seeping in with him as well.
No, I think that's sort of an interesting sort of, hey, pay attention to this kind of thing, which is like maybe there's more than just like the individual moment and struggle throughout the season. Maybe there's something deeper there for him, but we'll pay attention to it as it goes. I want to ask a couple of other things sort of quickly. We gave a whole lot of love to the Boston Celtics for when it looked like they were figuring stuff out, when they beat the Knicks and in your Timberwolves, and then they were beating the Nuggets and Portland and the Lakers and the Warriors. And since then, not the best. So they lost a rematch, another rematch with the Nets. Nothing to shake your head at.
Sure.
But then they lost to a very outmanned Hornets team, and they weren't even close to being in that game at all. And it may have been one of the worst outputs, sort of, and efforts I've seen from Boston all this entire season when they were fully healthy in that game. And then they take on OKC, who has how many players you think you can name on OKC that started in that game?
Oh, I can name most of them, but I'm not the type of person you should ask on that, right?
That's what I'm saying. Like you follow the game a lot more closely, and right. That was a team that lost 14 straight coming into that, and they fought with Boston the entire game and beat Boston. In fact, dominated the fourth quarter against Boston. It wasn't until the last 2 or 3 minutes that Boston showed any life in that fourth quarter.
Right.
And still another bad loss for the Celtics. Joe, I feel like this team is so hot and cold, so good, so bad at times, and they've shown us so many versions of their Jekyll and so many versions of their Hyde. We're less than a month left in the season. What is Boston?
They're exactly what they're exactly what they've shown. And reading Celtics blog, which they did a good job of breaking this down, talking about that they are an above average team that can beat just about anybody on a night, but could just as well lose to them. on any night. That does not bode well if they fall into the play-in tournament. It certainly does not bode well for them to be able to win a playoff series just because of that sheer inconsistency. And they've been searching for identity all year long. You know, we talked a lot about how they just needed their guys back. They needed to sort the roster out. And we did see that once everything kind of got in place and they made some trades, they looked a lot better. Some of those guys start to sit again and they fall right back into this situation. I will say this about Oklahoma City. 14 losses is a real thing, but even in those 14 losses, that is not a team that gives up and just doesn't play hard. It is a lot of young guys trying to make their mark. You know, Lou Dort, Darius Baisley, Alexei Pokashevsky, all three of those guys are real NBA players. Like, legit, they will be NBA players for a long time. And there's a couple of other guys out of that group, like Ty Jerome and Kenrich Williams, that they have roles in the NBA going forward. So it's a lot of G League level guys, but it's a lot of guys kind of cutting their teeth. And Jaylen Brown talked about this. He said, those young guys showed up. There is some talent over there. They showed up ready to play. We didn't. We slept walk again through a first half, and you can see that in the box score. You let a young team like the Thunder hang around, and eventually Oklahoma City makes a run, and the Celtics can't. Just looking at this, what boggles my mind, and this is, again, a sign of a team that is not ready for the big time. Boston had 6 different players appear in that game who scored 5 points or fewer. Only one of those 6 guys scored 5 points. That was Romeo Langford. Otherwise, it's 2 points Semi Ojeleye, 2 points Tristan Thompson, 0 points Jabari Parker, 2 points Grant Williams, 2 points Aaron Nesmith. You look over on the OKC side, 10 guys played. One of them, Tony Bradley, scored 4 points. Everybody else was 6, 8 points or higher, including multiple. So, you look at that G League level roster and everybody's contributing. You look at the Boston side and you've got Marcus Smart 4 for 17 from the field. Evan Fournier 4 for 14 from the field. Jaylen Brown's having to hoist 26 shots. He makes half of them. And other guys just simply don't produce. And I understand you can have a bad shooting night. That happens. I understand you can have a night where the entire team shoots poorly. That happens. But to not contribute like anywhere else, the box score, this is one of those cases where that actually tells the same story that the eyeball test did.
Yeah, I do want to mention, though, as much as I'd love to, and I would love to just sort of defend OKC, because, again, it's a G League team playing in the NBA. This team was playing on the second night of a back-to-back, OKC.
Mm-hmm. Which doesn't mean as much for young guys and a rotation that's up in the air all the time, But the last, I think, 6 or 7 games that they played on the second end, they've been average getting beat by like 30 points. That's a fair point.
And Boston had a day off, maybe 2 days off. And to come in with that effort after the Charlotte game, which like you mentioned, what was it, Tatum that said that they did not come in with the intensity like they should have come in after getting their butts handed to them after that game? Mm-hmm. That's an embarrassing effort, man. That is a tough one to swallow if you're a Celtics fan, because it's rough. It is rough to have that happen to that team. Not just the loss, but the way they lost too.
You remember Kyrie Irving's final season in Boston and how many games they had like that, and how many complaining of, we didn't come ready to play, we didn't give the effort. Kyrie complained about that for a while, trying to be a leader, but wasn't really doing a great job of it. Then all of a sudden he was part of the problem. And that team went, and if I remember correctly, got swept in the playoffs, and heads started to roll, right? Mm-hmm. The fact that this is happening again with a mostly different crew, but you still have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Marcus Smart as a part of that problem. You still have Brad Stevens as a part of that problem. The fact that it's happening again just a couple years later, and you're going, this team looks a lot like that Kyrie Irving-led group.
Yeah.
Heads are probably going to roll, and that may be Brad Stevens, and we've talked about that before, but you may also, I think Jason Tatum is safe for sure. but as important as Marcus Smart is, and as much of a like core guy as Jaylen Brown has seemed to be, I wouldn't put it past them either to, the Celtics either to look at either of those guys and say, do we need to shake something up here? Like you cannot have another year like this if you're Boston, because the expectations were way higher than what you've gotten.
They got Charlotte again tonight, does Boston, and I would imagine for a team that has not had Hayward for a while and Bell for a while, like this, Charlotte's still putting in work as I guess sort of strongly as they can, but
they've continued to fight, right? I mean, that's been a hallmark of that team, is they've continued to fight, even if the results are ugly. There's rarely been a game where you can go, yeah, they just kind of rolled over and didn't play, But
like now, when we were talking about schedule, there's games on here that I didn't think there would be bigger deals, but now they are. There's Charlotte, and San Antonio is not a team that's given up by any stretch, and Portland can score, and Orlando still freaking fights every night. Chicago's winning games that doesn't feel like that they should, which should include tonight against the Knicks. Then you got Miami, which is going to be a dogfight. You got those back to back. Cleveland, Minnesota, and then New York to wrap the season. Like, nothing's for sure for Boston, and I feel like it would be the epitome of what this season is if the Celtics team, which is very real, could be, end up in a play-in game.
And I'll say this, Cleveland and Orlando are the only two that you look on that list and go, I'm not so worried, but those are the very types of games that the Celtics have kind of crapped up. Like even Minnesota, they've won 3 in a row all of a sudden and been competitive before that in the couple of games they dropped.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, and so...
Well, 2 against the Jazz, not all 3. But yeah.
Especially at the end of the season like that, sometimes those bad teams all of a sudden catch you because young guys are going, this is my last chance to impress management. I just finally got called up from the G League, or I finally got put in the rotation, and a team that's been very bad all of a sudden gets competitive and plays spoiler because you've got just a different dynamic that's out there that's not on the scouting report from before.
Boston and Miami are tied right now for the safe spot at number 6. Both teams are 10 games out. Charlotte is now at 8 at 11.5, and they're just going to score something. I know that. Joe, last thing, if you don't mind. Our Nets, they clinched the playoff spot, right? That's all they needed to do. It's all good. It's all easy now. It's all easy, buddy. Your Brooklyn Nets, my Brooklyn Nets, are on their way to the playoffs and on obviously to be coronated. I don't know why we're waiting, but that's fine. We'll wait a little bit longer.
Absolutely not. And and if you want to hear more on that, we dug into the Nets quite a bit on our previous show. I'll put up the link here at this point. And go back, and we dug into the fact that the Nets are a paper tiger right now, even though they've looked a lot better with Kyrie and KD back playing together. But the James Harden hamstring issue looms large, and the in and out rotation looms large. I'll feel a lot better if we get to the end of the season and Kevin Durant has stayed upright throughout all of this and is ready to go into a playoff series. And then we'll understand a little bit more. But to their credit, to win the number 1 seed in a year of so much topsy-turviness and so much change is a credit to them. And as we said on the previous show, talking about how the Lakers were in trouble, you bank these wins. You need these wins sometimes because those nights come around where the unpredictable happens and injuries and that sort of thing. And that is why even in a 82-game schedule or a 72-game schedule like this year, every single game, every single win counts. And if I'm Brooklyn, home court advantage doesn't mean all that much when compared to, Philadelphia or Milwaukee or whatever. There aren't that many fans in the stands, but any is worth something. And the matchup still, it's better to be playing that 8th seed in the first round. So we'll see what happens. And if you want more Nets coverage, you can dig in on the link that I shared. If you want to listen to us over on iTunes, Spotify.
Wait, can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
For 30 seconds or less, I was just going to ask you this about it. There's only 2 playoff spots that have been clinched, the Nets and the Jazz at this point. The the 76ers are a game and a half out of first place right now. Do you think the 76ers have what it takes over this next 10, 11, 12 games to end the season? Can they end up getting that 1.5 game lead off and be the number 1 seed?
It's a cop-out answer, but it entirely depends on, does Kevin Durant stay healthy? If he does not, then yes, Philadelphia has the inside chance. Does Embiid and Ben Simmons miss any more of these like 2-3 game stretches which keep popping up for them? That's a big part of it too. But let's hang it all on Durant. If Durant stays healthy and plays, Brooklyn keeps it.
Okay, that's fair. So we're on the internet. We're on YouTube. You can find us where you get your famous podcast too, on Spotify and on the Apple Podcast as well. And if you're using Google, Deezer, Castbox, all that stuff, we can be found there as well. Joel, would you like to say something nice to the good people before we leave?
I bid you all a fond adieu and catch us on Sunday as we do episode 59, the full episode of BbA.
All the famous 59s of the world stand up.